Emma had always been meticulous about her home. Every Saturday morning, she would spend hours cleaning, organizing, and ensuring that everything was in its proper place. It was a ritual that brought her a sense of peace and control. On one such morning, as the sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow across the living room, Emma found herself reaching into the pocket of her favorite coat. Her fingers brushed against something unusual, a piece of paper. With a furrowed brow, she pulled it out and unfolded it. The letter was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged as if written in haste. As her eyes scanned the words, her heart began to race. It was an anonymous note, revealing that her boyfriend, Mark, had another family in a nearby town. Each word felt like a dagger, piercing the trust and love she had so carefully built with him. She read it twice, hoping she had misunderstood. But the message was clear and devastating. "Mark," she whispered to herself, disbelief and hurt lacing her voice. She felt the world around her crumble. The walls of their shared apartment seemed to close in, suffocating her with betrayal and confusion. For a moment, she stood frozen, clutching the letter as if it were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Then, a surge of anger and determination propelled her forward. She needed answers. She needed to confront him. Mark was in the kitchen, casually sipping his morning coffee as if nothing had changed. Emma walked in, her footsteps steady but her heart pounding. She placed the letter on the table in front of him, her eyes never leaving his face. "Care to explain this?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and sorrow. Mark glanced at the letter, and for a brief moment, panic flashed in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but then closed it, unable to find the words. His silence was all the confirmation Emma needed. "So, it's true," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have another family?" Mark sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to alleviate the weight of his deceit. "Emma, I don't," she interrupted, holding up her hand. "Just don't." The silence that followed was deafening. Emma felt a torrent of emotions crashing over her. Rage, heartbreak, betrayal. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I'm leaving," she declared, her voice gaining strength. "I can't stay here, not after this." Mark's eyes widened in shock. "Emma, please, let's talk about this." "There's nothing left to talk about," she replied firmly. "You made your choice." With that, she turned on her heel and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Mark and the remnants of their relationship behind. She packed her bags quickly, not wanting to linger in the place that now held nothing but painful memories. As she closed the door behind her, she felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. She was stepping into an uncertain future, but at least it was one free from lies. Emma decided to move to Chicago, a city that had always intrigued her with its vibrancy and opportunities. She found a small apartment on the north side, modest but cozy, and began to settle in. The city was a stark contrast to the quiet suburban life she had known, but it offered a sense of anonymity and a chance to start over. One evening, as she unpacked the last of her belongings, Emma stumbled upon an old journal she had kept during her college years. Flipping through its pages, she found entries about her dreams of opening a bakery. It was a passion she had buried under the weight of adult responsibilities and her relationship with Mark. But now, in the wake of her heartache, it resurfaced with a newfound urgency. "Why not?" she mused aloud, a spark of hope igniting within her. Why not chase that dream now? The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Emma scoured the city for a suitable location, finally finding a charming but run-down storefront in a quaint neighborhood. It needed a lot of work, but she saw its potential. She poured her heart and soul into renovating the space, transforming it into a warm and inviting bakery. As she painted walls, installed shelves, and tested recipes, Emma felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. The physical labor was tough, but it was also therapeutic, helping her channel her pain into something creative and fulfilling. She spent long hours perfecting her pastries and breads, determined to make her bakery a success. One afternoon, as she was experimenting with a new bread recipe, there was a knock on the bakery door. Emma wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and went to answer it. Standing on the other side was an elderly woman with a kind smile and twinkling eyes. "Hello, dear," the woman greeted warmly. "I'm Mrs. Thompson, your neighbor. I've been watching you work so hard and thought you might need a little help." Emma felt a rush of gratitude. "Oh, Mrs. Thompson, that's so kind of you. I could definitely use some help." Mrs. Thompson chuckled. "Well, I may be old, but I know a thing or two about baking. Why don't we start with my famous apple pie recipe?" As they worked side by side, Emma found herself opening up to Mrs. Thompson. They shared stories, laughter, and the occasional tear. Mrs. Thompson became a source of wisdom and comfort, offering not only baking tips but also life advice. "Remember, Emma," Mrs. Thompson said one day as they kneaded dough together, "life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes the darkest times lead to the brightest futures." Emma nodded, feeling a sense of hope. She was beginning to see that her journey was not just about escaping the past, but also about building a brighter future. With Mrs. Thompson's guidance and her own determination, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the opening day of her bakery approached, Emma felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. She knew that this was just the beginning of her new life in Chicago, and she was ready to embrace it with open arms. The betrayal she had experienced was a painful chapter, but it had also led her to rediscover her passion and strength. And for that, she was grateful. Emma's new life in Chicago began with the daunting task of transforming an old, run-down space into her dream pad area. She had rented a small storefront in a quaint neighborhood, far removed from the life she once knew. The initial excitement of starting anew was quickly overshadowed by the sheer amount of work required to get the place up and running. The space had good bones, but it needed a lot of love to become the cozy, welcoming bakery she envisioned. One crisp morning, as Emma was hauling buckets of paint and scrubbing years of grime off the walls, she heard a gentle knock on the open door. Turning around, she saw an elderly woman with a warm smile and kind eyes standing there. "Hello, dear. I'm Mrs. Thompson, your neighbor from across the street," the woman said, extending her hand. Emma wiped her hands on her jeans and shook it. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Thompson." "I'm Emma," she replied, grateful for a friendly face amid the chaos. "I couldn't help but notice you're setting up a bakery. I used to bake a lot myself, back in the day. If you need any help or recipes, I'd be more than happy to lend a hand," Mrs. Thompson offered. Emma's eyes lit up. "That would be wonderful. I'm trying to incorporate some traditional recipes, but I'm a bit rusty." Mrs. Thompson chuckled. "Well, let's see what we can do about that." Over the following weeks, Mrs. Thompson became a regular visitor, bringing with her a wealth of knowledge and a treasure trove of old recipes. Emma and Mrs. Thompson spent countless hours in the kitchen, experimenting with different ingredients and perfecting the recipes. It was during these sessions that Emma learned about Mrs. Thompson's late husband and her own love for baking that had dwindled after his passing. "You know, Emma," Mrs. Thompson said one day while kneading dough, "baking has a way of healing the soul. It brought me great comfort when I needed it most. I hope it does the same for you." Emma nodded, feeling a deep sense of connection with the elderly woman. "It already has. I don't know what I would have done without you, Mrs. Thompson." The elderly woman smiled softly. "Call me Margaret, dear." As the renovation progressed, Emma faced a myriad of challenges. Finding reliable suppliers was more difficult than she had anticipated, and there were days when the financial strain felt overwhelming. One particularly tough afternoon, Emma slumped into a chair, staring at a stack of unpaid bills. Margaret, who had been observing Emma's struggle, sat down beside her. "What's troubling you, dear?" "It's just everything," Emma sighed. "The costs are piling up, and I'm not sure I can keep this up." Margaret patted her hand reassuringly. "Starting a business is never easy, Emma. But remember, you have a community here. Don't be afraid to ask for help." Taking Margaret's advice to heart, Emma reached out to local suppliers and negotiated better deals. She also started a small crowdfunding campaign, sharing her vision for the bakery with the community. Slowly but surely, things began to improve. The space started to take shape, and the aroma of freshly baked bread and pastries soon filled the air. One evening, as the sun was setting, Emma and Margaret sat on the stoop outside the bakery, sipping tea. "You've come a long way, Emma. This place is starting to feel like home," Margaret said, her eyes twinkling with pride. Emma smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. I couldn't have done it without you, Margaret. You've been my rock. Nonsense, Margaret replied. You've had this strength inside you all along. You just needed a little push to find it. As the bakery's opening day approached, Emma and Margaret worked tirelessly to ensure everything was perfect. They tested recipes late into the night, laughed over shared stories, and bonded over their mutual love for baking. Margaret's presence was a comforting constant in Emma's life, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, there was always hope. However, the path to success was not without its hurdles. Emma encountered issues with delayed ingredient deliveries and equipment malfunctions, but each time, Margaret was there with a solution or a word of encouragement. Remember, Emma, every challenge is an opportunity to learn and grow, Margaret would often say. On the eve of the grand opening, Emma stood in the middle of the bakery, taking in the sight of the gleaming countertops, the neatly arranged display cases, and the cozy seating area. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, and more. Tomorrow's the big day, Margaret said, placing a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. Are you ready? Emma took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, I am. Thanks to you. The next morning, the bakery buzzed with excitement. Neighbors and friends gathered to celebrate the opening, and the sweet scent of freshly baked goods wafted through the air. Emma, wearing her new apron, greeted each customer with a smile, grateful for the overwhelming support. Margaret watched from a corner, a look of pure joy on her face. You did it, Emma. You really did it. Emma hugged her tightly. We did it, Margaret. We did it together. As the days turned into weeks, the bakery flourished. Emma's creations became the talk of the neighborhood, and she found herself busier than ever. But no matter how hectic things got, she always made time for Margaret. The two of them continued their baking sessions, experimenting with new recipes and perfecting old ones. One day, as they were working on a particularly challenging pastry, Margaret paused and looked at Emma thoughtfully. You know, Emma, life has a way of surprising us. When one door closes, another one opens. You just have to be brave enough to walk through it. Emma smiled, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. Margaret squeezed her hand gently. Just promise me one thing, dear. Never stop believing in yourself. I promise, Emma replied, feeling a renewed sense of determination. With Margaret's guidance and the support of the community, Emma's bakery continued to thrive. She faced each new challenge with resilience and grace, knowing that she was not alone. And as she looked around at the bustling bakery, filled with laughter and the delicious smell of fresh pastries, she realized that she had found not only a new beginning but also a family. In the heart of Chicago, amidst the clatter of mixing bowls and the warmth of freshly baked bread, Emma discovered her true strength. And with Margaret by her side, she knew that no matter what the future held, she was ready to face it with courage and hope. Emma had been in Chicago for a few months now, and the padaria was starting to take shape. The smell of freshly baked bread mixed with the crisp autumn air, creating a sense of warmth and hope that she desperately needed. Her friendship with Mrs. Thompson had grown into something she cherished deeply, providing her with both wisdom and comfort. Emma was beginning to find her place in this new city, but life had a way of presenting unexpected opportunities and challenges. One crisp evening, as Emma was closing up the padaria, she noticed a flyer on the community bulletin board outside. It was an announcement for a community meeting aimed at revitalizing the neighborhood. Intrigued and eager to get involved with her new community, she decided to attend. The meeting was held in a small, dimly lit church hall. As Emma entered, she saw a diverse group of people: young parents, elderly couples, local shop owners, and a few curious faces like hers. She found a seat near the back and listened intently as various speakers took turns discussing plans to beautify the area, support local businesses, and create a stronger sense of community. During a break, Emma wandered over to a table laden with refreshments. She was pouring herself a cup of coffee when she accidentally bumped into a tall man with a camera slung around his neck. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Emma exclaimed, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "No problem at all," the man replied with a friendly smile. "I'm Jack, by the way." "Emma," she said, extending her hand. They shook hands, and Emma couldn't help but notice the warmth in his eyes. They began chatting, and Jack explained that he was a photographer working on a documentary about urban revitalization. He was covering the meeting for his project. "You must be new to the neighborhood," Jack observed. "Yes, I am. I just moved here a few months ago," Emma replied. "I'm opening a padaria down the street." "A padaria? That's wonderful. I love fresh bread," Jack said, his eyes lighting up. "Maybe I could stop by sometime and take some photos for my project." "I'd like that," Emma said with a smile. Over the next few weeks, Emma and Jack's paths crossed frequently. Jack would often drop by the padaria to chat and take photos, capturing the essence of Emma's journey and the heart of the community. Their conversations flowed easily, and they found solace in sharing their stories of loss and healing. One rainy afternoon, Jack and Emma were sitting in a cozy corner of the padaria, sipping on hot chocolate and watching the raindrops dance on the window. "You know," Jack began, "I used to think that losing someone meant losing a part of yourself forever. But being here, working on this project, and meeting people like you, it's made me realize that loss can also lead to new beginnings." Emma nodded, her eyes misting with tears. "I felt the same way after I found out about Mark. It was like my whole world fell apart. But moving here, starting this padaria, meeting you and Mrs. Thompson, it's given me a new sense of purpose." Jack reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. "You're stronger than you think, Emma, and your padaria is going to be a cornerstone of this community." Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, and Emma found herself looking forward to Jack's visits. They became each other's confidants, finding comfort in their shared experiences and dreams for the future. One evening, Emma received an unexpected invitation to participate in a community project that would involve her padaria. The project aimed to create a community garden and hold a series of events to promote local businesses. Emma was thrilled at the opportunity and eagerly accepted. As the project kicked off, Emma threw herself into the work with enthusiasm. She collaborated with other local business owners, organized baking workshops, and even hosted a community bake-off. The padaria became a hub of activity, and Emma's reputation as a talented baker and dedicated community member grew. Jack documented every step of the project with his camera, capturing the smiles, the hard work, and the sense of unity that blossomed in the neighborhood. One day, as they were reviewing the photos together, Emma couldn't help but marvel at the transformation. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a photo of children planting flowers in the garden. "It's amazing how far we've come." "It's beautiful," Jack agreed, "and your padaria has played a big part in that." Emma felt a swell of pride and gratitude. She had come to Chicago to escape her past, but she had found so much more: a new home, new friends, and a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as they were closing up the padaria, Jack turned to Emma with a thoughtful expression. "Emma, I've been thinking, would you be interested in collaborating on a photo exhibition? We could showcase the revitalization project and the role your padaria has played in it." Emma's eyes widened with excitement. "That sounds incredible, Jack. I'd love to." They began planning the exhibition, pouring their hearts into every detail. It became a labor of love, a testament to their journey and the strength of their community. As the exhibition day approached, Emma felt a mix of nerves and excitement. She had come a long way from the woman who had found that devastating letter in her pocket. She had rebuilt her life, found new friends, and rediscovered her passion for baking. On the night of the exhibition, the community center was filled with laughter and chatter. Emma stood by Jack's side, greeting guests and sharing stories. The photographs on display told a powerful story of resilience, hope, and the power of community. As the evening drew to a close, Jack and Emma found a quiet moment to reflect. They stood in front of a photo of the padaria, bathed in the golden light of a setting sun. "You've created something truly special here, Emma," Jack said softly. "We've created something special," Emma corrected, her eyes shining with gratitude. Jack smiled and pulled her into a gentle embrace. "To new beginnings," he whispered. "To new beginnings," Emma echoed, feeling a sense of peace and contentment she hadn't known in a long time. In that moment, surrounded by friends, laughter, and the warmth of the community they had helped build, Emma knew that she had found her place. The The future was still uncertain, but with Jack by her side and the support of her new friends, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Emma threw herself into the community project with a newfound vigor, channeling all her energy into organizing events and selling her baked goods. The small padaria she had opened in Chicago was beginning to gain traction, and she could feel the community's pulse quickening around her efforts. The vibrant neighborhood was starting to see the positive changes brought about by the project, and Emma's pastries became a symbol of that transformation. One sunny afternoon, as Emma meticulously arranged an array of freshly baked croissants and muffins on a table for an outdoor event, she was approached by a young mother with a child in tow. "These look amazing," the woman said, her eyes wide with delight. "Thank you," Emma replied with a warm smile. "Would you like to try one?" The woman nodded eagerly, and Emma handed her a croissant. As she took a bite, her face lit up with joy. "This is delicious. I'll definitely be coming back for more." Emma's heart swelled with pride. Moments like these made all the hard work worthwhile. She watched as more people flocked to her table, drawn by the irresistible aroma and the promise of something special. It wasn't long before a small crowd had gathered, each person eager to taste her creations. Meanwhile, Jack was roaming the event with his camera, capturing the essence of the community's revitalization. His lens found Emma more than once, her face glowing with happiness as she interacted with her customers. He couldn't help but feel a swell of admiration for her resilience and dedication. Later that evening, after the event had wound down and the last pastries had been sold, Jack approached Emma. His camera hung around his neck, and a look of satisfaction played on his features. "Emma, you did an incredible job today," he said, his voice filled with genuine praise. "Your padaria is becoming the heart of this community." Emma blushed slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you, Jack. I couldn't have done it without your support and the amazing photos you've been taking. They've really helped bring attention to the project." Jack smiled, a hint of something deeper in his eyes. "It's easy to capture something when it's this meaningful. You have a gift, Emma, not just for baking, but for bringing people together." The two shared a moment of silent understanding, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, they decided to grab dinner together at a nearby diner. The atmosphere was cozy and intimate, a perfect setting for the conversation that was about to unfold. Seated in a corner booth, Emma and Jack perused the menu, but their minds were elsewhere. The connection between them had been undeniable from the start, but tonight, it seemed to shimmer just beneath the surface. "Jack," Emma began, her voice soft but steady, "thank you for everything you've done for me and the padaria. I don't know what I would have done without your support." Jack looked up from his menu, meeting her gaze. "Emma, you don't have to thank me. You've been a beacon of light in my life, too. After everything I've been through, meeting you has been a blessing." Emma's heart skipped a beat at his words. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the shared pain of their past losses creating an unspoken bond between them. "I feel the same way," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. As the evening wore on, their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on everything from their dreams for the future to the small joys they found in everyday life. The attraction between them became more apparent, a magnetic pull that neither could ignore. Yet, they were both still healing, their hearts tender from past wounds. At one point, Jack reached across the table, taking Emma's hand in his. "Emma, I know we've both been hurt before, and it's not easy to let go of that pain. But I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what." Emma squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you, Jack. That means more to me than you know." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter and shared stories, the connection between them growing stronger with each passing moment. As they walked back to their respective homes, the night air cool against their skin, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of hope blooming within her heart. Days turned into weeks, and the padaria's popularity continued to soar. Emma threw herself into her work with renewed passion, organizing more community events and ensuring that her baked goods were always of the highest quality. Jack remained a constant presence, his camera documenting every step of the journey. One afternoon, As Emma was kneading dough in the back of her pad area, Jack walked in, a look of excitement on his face. "Emma, you won't believe this," he said, holding up a stack of photographs. "I just got word that a local magazine wants to do a feature on the community project, and they want to highlight your pad area." Emma's eyes widened in disbelief. "Are you serious? That's incredible." Jack nodded, his grin infectious. "Absolutely. They were really impressed with the photos and the story behind your bakery. This could be a huge boost for your business." Emma felt a surge of gratitude and excitement. "Jack, this is amazing news. Thank you so much for all your hard work." Jack shrugged modestly. "I couldn't have done it without you, Emma. You've been the heart and soul of this project." As the magazine feature came to fruition, the padaria's fame spread even further. More customers flocked to the small bakery, eager to taste the pastries that had captured the community's heart. Emma's dream was becoming a reality, one delicious bite at a time. Despite the growing success, Emma and Jack remained grounded, their bond deepening with each passing day. They found solace in each other's company, sharing their hopes and fears in quiet moments. Yet, the specter of their past losses still lingered, a reminder of the fragility of happiness. One evening, after the padaria had closed for the day, Emma and Jack found themselves alone in the cozy kitchen. The scent of freshly baked bread filled the air, and the soft glow of the lights created an intimate ambience. Jack leaned against the counter, watching Emma with a thoughtful expression. "Emma, I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Emma looked up from her work, sensing the weight of his words. "What is it, Jack?" He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I care about you, Emma, more than I ever thought possible. But I also know that we're both still healing. I don't want to rush into anything and risk getting hurt again." Emma's heart ached at his honesty, but she understood his hesitation. "I feel the same way, Jack. I care about you deeply, but I'm scared too. We've both been through so much, and I don't want to jeopardize what we have." Jack stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Maybe we can take things one day at a time. No pressure, no expectations. Just see where this goes." Emma nodded, a sense of relief washing over her. "I think that's a good idea. Let's take it slow and see what happens." As they stood there, the unspoken promise hanging in the air, Emma felt a glimmer of hope. Despite the uncertainties and the lingering pain, she knew that she had found something special in Jack. Their journey was far from over, but for now, they had each other, and that was enough. Emma had found a new rhythm in her life in Chicago. The padaria was blooming, her friendship with Mrs. Thompson had grown deeper, and her rapport with Jack had brought a semblance of joy back into her heart. Yet, life has a way of throwing curveballs when least expected. One chilly afternoon, as Emma was kneading dough in the back of her bakery, the bell above the door chimed. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the front, her heart nearly stopping when she saw who stood there. "Mark," she whispered, incredulous. He looked different, worn. His eyes were a mix of regret and desperation. "Emma, please, I need to talk to you," he pleaded. She felt a rush of emotions, anger, sorrow, confusion. "What are you doing here?" she managed to say, her voice trembling. "I've made a terrible mistake. I miss you, Emma. I've left the other family. I want us to start over," he said, his voice cracking. Emma's mind was a whirlpool of thoughts. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You have no right to come here and disrupt my life again," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You broke me, Mark." He stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "I know, and I'm sorry, but I've realized you're the one I truly love." Unable to process this alone, Emma asked him to leave and give her time to think. She needed guidance and knew exactly where to find it. She hurried to Mrs. Thompson's apartment, her heart heavy with the weight of the unexpected encounter. Mrs. Thompson welcomed her with a warm smile, but it quickly faded when she saw Emma's troubled face. "What's wrong, dear?" she asked, guiding Emma to the cozy living room. Emma recounted the encounter with Mark, her voice breaking at times. Mrs. Thompson listened intently, her wise eyes reflecting a lifetime of experiences. "I don't know what to do. A part of me wants to believe he's changed, but another part is terrified of getting hurt again," Emma confessed. Mrs. Thompson reached out and held her hands. Emma, it's natural to feel conflicted. Matters of the heart are never simple. You need to follow your heart, but also protect it. Trust is hard to rebuild once broken. Be cautious, my dear. That evening, Emma felt an overwhelming need to talk to Jack. She found him at the community center, setting up for an upcoming event. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, but his smile faded as he noticed her troubled expression. Emma, what's going on? He asked, concerned. She took a deep breath and told him about Mark's unexpected visit. Jack's face hardened, and he looked away, clearly uncomfortable. He says he wants a second chance, Emma said, searching Jack's eyes for any hint of what he was feeling. Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. Emma, you deserve someone who values you from the start, not someone who realizes your worth only after losing you. I know, she replied softly, but I can't just ignore the years we spent together. It's complicated. Jack nodded, his expression softening. I understand. Just be careful. You deserve to be happy, Emma, truly happy. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the situation settling around them. Emma felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. She appreciated Jack's support, but couldn't ignore the discomfort her dilemma had caused him. In the days that followed, Emma found herself in a constant state of introspection. She threw herself into her work at the bakery and the community projects, trying to find clarity. Mark's words echoed in her mind, mingling with Mrs. Thompson's advice and Jack's heartfelt plea for her happiness. One evening, as she was closing the bakery, Mark appeared again. This time, he looked more composed, but there was still a desperation in his eyes. Emma, can we talk? He asked, his voice tentative. She nodded, leading him to a small table in the corner. They sat down, the air thick with tension. Emma, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I've been a mess without you. I've left them, and I want to make things right with you, Mark said, his voice earnest. Emma looked at him, her heart aching. Mark, I need to know why you did it. Why did you betray me? He sighed, looking down at his hands. I was a fool, Emma. I got caught up in something I didn't know how to get out of, but I realize now that I can't live without you. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. I don't know if I can trust you again. Mark reached across the table, gently taking her hand. I understand, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove myself to you. Emma pulled her hand back, the pain too raw. I need time, Mark. I need to figure out what I want. As Mark left, Emma felt a strange sense of relief. She had taken a step towards confronting her past, but the future still seemed uncertain. She knew she needed to talk to Jack again, to explain her feelings and decisions. The next day, she met Jack at the park, where he was taking photos for a community project. He greeted her with a tentative smile, but his eyes betrayed his concern. Hey, she said softly. Hey, he replied, lowering his camera. How are you holding up? Emma sighed, sitting down on a nearby bench. It's been tough. I'm still trying to process everything. Jack sat beside her, his presence comforting. I get that. It's a lot to handle. I talked to Mark again, she began, watching Jack's reaction. He says he wants to prove himself, but I told him I need time. Jack nodded, his eyes focused on the ground. That's fair. You need to do what's right for you. Emma took a deep breath, her heart pounding. Jack, I need you to know something. You've been a rock for me through all this, and I care about you deeply. But I need to resolve this part of my past before I can think about the future. Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding and a hint of sadness. I understand, Emma. I'll be here for you, whatever you decide. They sat in silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Emma felt a sense of gratitude for Jack's support, but also a pang of guilt for the uncertainty she was causing him. As she walked back to her apartment that evening, Emma realized that her journey was far from over. The road ahead was filled with difficult decisions and emotional challenges. But she also knew she had the strength to face whatever came her way, supported by the people who cared about her. Emma sat in her modest apartment in Chicago, staring at the untouched cup of chamomile tea on the table in front of her. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Mark had reappeared in her life, seeking forgiveness and a chance to explain his side of the story. Despite the turmoil inside her, Emma had agreed to meet with him. She needed closure, if nothing else, and maybe understanding his perspective would provide some. When she met Mark at a small cafe near her pad area, she maintained a stoic demeanor. Mark's face was etched with regret, and his voice trembled as he began to speak. "Emma, I know I hurt you deeply, and I can't take back what I've done," Mark started, his eyes pleading for an opportunity to make amends. "But I need you to understand that things weren't as simple as they seemed. My other family, it was complicated. I was trying to protect you from a mess I created." Emma listened silently, her heart warring between the memories of their past together and the betrayal that had shattered her trust. She had decided to give him this chance to speak, but she was determined to keep her emotions in check. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," Mark continued, "but I want to make things right. I want to be a part of your life again, if you'll let me." Emma took a deep breath, her eyes meeting Mark's with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "Mark, I'm not the same person I was when we were together. I've built a new life here, and I can't afford to let the past ruin what I've worked so hard for. I'll listen to you, but I need you to understand that I'm not making any promises." As they talked, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of emotional distance. Mark's words seemed sincere, but the scars of his betrayal ran deep. She knew she had to be cautious and protect herself from further heartbreak. Meanwhile, Jack was grappling with his own feelings about Mark's return. He had grown close to Emma and felt a protective instinct toward her. Seeing Mark back in her life triggered a sense of unease and jealousy that he struggled to conceal. Despite these emotions, Jack continued to support Emma in her endeavors, helping her with the community project and promoting her pad area through his photography. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Emma and Jack found themselves alone in the pad area, the warm glow of the kitchen lights casting a cozy ambience. Jack had just finished photographing a batch of Emma's freshly baked pastries, and they sat down to share a quiet moment together. "Jack, I need to talk to you about something," Emma began, her voice tinged with hesitation. Jack looked up from his camera, his eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and concern. "What is it, Emma?" "It's about Mark. I met with him today to hear his side of the story," Emma admitted, watching Jack's reaction closely. Jack's expression tightened, and he set his camera down, giving her his full attention. "And? What did he have to say?" "He claims that things were more complicated than I knew, and that he wants to make amends," Emma explained. "But I'm not sure if I can trust him again. I value what we have, Jack, and I don't want to jeopardize it." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Emma, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you that seeing Mark back in your life makes me uneasy. I care about you a lot, and I don't want to see you hurt again." Emma reached out and placed her hand over Jack's, a gesture of reassurance. "I care about you too, Jack, more than I realized. This whole situation has made me see how important you are to me, but I feel like I need to resolve things with Mark, one way or another, before I can truly move forward." Jack nodded, though his eyes bore the weight of uncertainty. "I understand. Just know that I'm here for you, no matter what you decide." As the days passed, Emma found herself increasingly torn between her unresolved past with Mark and her growing feelings for Jack. The Padaria and the community project kept her busy, but her mind constantly wandered back to the two men who now occupied her thoughts. One afternoon, while she was organizing a community bake sale, Emma noticed Jack standing off to the side, capturing the event with his camera. She decided it was time for an honest conversation. "Jack, can we talk?" Emma called out, motioning for him to join her. He approached, his camera hanging loosely around his neck. "Sure, Emma. What's on your mind?" Emma took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize that my feelings for you are deeper than I initially acknowledged. But with Mark back in the picture, everything feels so complicated." Jack's expression softened, and he gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Emma, I don't want to pressure you, but I need to know where we stand. I care about you deeply, and I want to be with you, but I can't do that if you're still entangled with Mark." Emma nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I know, Jack. I need to make a decision, for my sake and for yours. I can't keep living in this limbo." Later that evening, Emma sat alone in her apartment, reflecting on the choices before her. She knew she had to confront Mark one final time to truly put the past behind her. The next morning, she arranged to meet him at the same cafe where they had talked before. "Mark, I appreciate you explaining things to me, but I've come to a decision," Emma said firmly, her voice unwavering. Mark's face tensed, sensing the finality in her tone. "What is it, Emma?" "I can't go back to what we had. Too much has happened, and I've changed," Emma stated, her resolve clear. "I need to move forward, and I can't do that with you in my life." Mark's shoulders slumped, and he nodded slowly. "I understand, Emma. I wish you the best." With that chapter of her life finally closed, Emma felt a sense of relief wash over her. She knew it was time to fully embrace her future, one that included Jack and the life she had built in Chicago. Returning to the Padaria, Emma found Jack waiting for her. She approached him, her heart full of newfound clarity. "Jack, I've made my decision," Emma said, her voice steady. "I want to be with you. I want us to build something together." Jack's eyes lit up with a mixture of joy and relief. "Emma, you have no idea how happy that makes me." As they embraced, Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Jack by her side, she was ready to face whatever challenges came her way. Together, they would create a future filled with love, resilience, and the promise of new beginnings. Emma stood by the window of her small Chicago apartment, the skyline glittering in the distance. The city had become her refuge, a place where she could rebuild herself after the devastating betrayal by Mark. Her dream of opening a Padaria was no longer a mere fantasy. It was now a bustling reality. Yet, as the fragrance of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, Emma knew she had to confront the ghost of her past once and for all. With newfound clarity and strength, Emma called Mark to arrange a meeting. They decided to meet at a coffee shop not too far from her apartment. As she walked in, she saw him already seated, nervously fidgeting with a cup of coffee. The man she once loved now seemed like a stranger, his presence a reminder of the anguish she had endured. "Emma," Mark began, his voice filled with a mix of regret and hope. "Thank you for meeting me. I know I hurt you deeply, and I want to explain myself." Emma took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his with an unwavering gaze. "Mark, I'm here to listen, but I need you to understand that this isn't about us getting back together. I need closure." He nodded, his face falling slightly but respecting her words. "I made a terrible mistake," he confessed. "I was living a double life, and I thought I could manage it, but I was wrong. I hurt you and my other family. I lost everything because of my selfishness." Emma listened, her heart heavy but resolute. "I can't forgive you for what you did, Mark. You shattered my trust, and I had to leave everything behind to start anew. I've found a new life here, and I've realized that I don't need you to be happy." Mark's eyes welled up with tears, but he knew there was no turning back. "I understand, Emma. I truly hope you find happiness. You deserve it." With that, Emma stood up, feeling an immense weight lift off her shoulders. "Goodbye, Mark," she said softly, walking out of the coffee shop and into the bright Chicago afternoon. Later that day, Emma met Jack at a small park near the lake. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the water, and she felt a sense of calm as she approached him. Jack was sitting on a bench, his camera resting on his lap, a contemplative look on his face. "Hey, Jack," Emma greeted, taking a seat beside him. "I talked to Mark today." Jack turned to her, concern etched on his features. "How did it go?" "It was hard, but necessary," Emma replied. "I told him I couldn't go back to him. I've moved on, and I needed to make that clear to him and to myself." Jack nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "I'm glad you did that, Emma. You deserve to be free from that pain." Emma took his hand, her eyes searching his. "Jack, I need you to know that my feelings for you are real. But I also understand if you need time to process everything. This has been a lot for both of us." Jack squeezed her hand gently, his eyes softening. "Emma, I care about you deeply, but you're right. I do need some time. I want to make sure we're both ready for this." "I understand," Emma said, her voice steady. "I'll be here, focusing on the Padaria and the project. Take all the time you need." With a mutual understanding, they stood up and walked back to the city, their hands still intertwined. The uncertainty of their future loomed over them, but Emma felt a sense of peace knowing she had confronted her past and was honest about her feelings. In the following weeks, Emma threw herself into her work, determined to make her padaria a success. The community project was in full swing, and her bakery had become a beloved fixture in the neighborhood. She worked tirelessly, her days filled with the hum of the oven, the chatter of customers, and the occasional visit from Mrs. Thompson, who continued to be a source of wisdom and support. One evening, as Emma was closing up the padaria, Mrs. Thompson walked in, her warm smile a welcome sight. "Emma, dear, how are you holding up?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with concern. "I'm doing well, Mrs. Thompson," Emma replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's been busy, but in a good way. I feel like I'm finally finding my place here." Mrs. Thompson nodded approvingly. "You've come a long way, Emma. I'm proud of you. And remember, it's okay to take things one day at a time. There's no rush to figure everything out." Emma smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude for the elderly woman who had become like a second mother to her. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. Your support means the world to me." As the days turned into weeks, Emma noticed a gradual change in Jack. He continued to document the community project, but he seemed more distant, his usual warmth replaced by a guarded demeanor. One evening, after a particularly long day at the bakery, Emma decided to confront him. "Jack, can we talk?" she asked, finding him at the community center, editing photos on his laptop. "Of course, Emma," he replied, looking up from his work. "What's on your mind?" "I've noticed you've been pulling away," Emma began, her voice tinged with concern. "I know you needed time, but I can't help but feel like something's changed." Jack sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You're right, Emma. I have been distant. It's just seeing Mark back in your life, even briefly, it brought up a lot of insecurities for me. I needed to sort through them." Emma reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "Jack, I understand, but I need you to know that my decision to end things with Mark was final. I want to be with you, but I also respect your need for time." Jack looked into her eyes, his expression softening. "I appreciate that, Emma, and I promise I'm not going anywhere. I just need to make sure I'm in the right headspace for us." With that, they shared a quiet moment of understanding, the bond between them growing stronger despite the uncertainties. Emma knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face it head-on, with or without Jack by her side. As the weeks went by, the padaria flourished, and Emma found herself more immersed in her work than ever. She organized events, collaborated with local businesses, and continued to build a sense of community through her bakery. The project was thriving, and her padaria had become a symbol of resilience and hope for many in the neighborhood. Though her future with Jack remained uncertain, Emma felt a deep sense of fulfillment in her work and her newfound independence. She had confronted her past, embraced her present, and was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt truly at peace with herself and the life she was building. The road to healing and happiness was far from over, but Emma knew she had the strength and determination to navigate it. With the support of friends like Mrs. Thompson and the community she had come to love, Emma was ready to embrace whatever the future held, one day at a time. The culmination of the community project was finally here. The neighborhood had been buzzing with excitement for weeks, and now the day had arrived. The streets were adorned with colorful banners and balloons, and the air was filled with the tantalizing aroma of freshly baked goods from Emma's bakery. The event was a celebration of the neighborhood's revitalization, and Emma's bakery was at the heart of it all. As Emma stood behind the counter, serving customers with a radiant smile, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. The journey to this moment had been anything but easy, but every challenge had been worth it. The bakery was bustling with activity, and the community had embraced it wholeheartedly. Mrs. Thompson was seated at a table near the window, beaming with pride as she watched Emma in action. The elderly woman had become more than just a neighbor. She was a mentor, a friend, and a guiding light for Emma. Jack was there too, capturing the essence of the event through his lens. His camera clicked away, documenting the smiles, the laughter, and the sense of unity that permeated the air. Emma caught his eye from across the room, and they exchanged a warm, knowing smile. The bond they had formed was special, and despite the uncertainties that lingered, there was an unspoken understanding between them. As the day progressed, Emma found herself surrounded by well-wishers and friends. She was in the middle of a conversation with a regular customer when Jack approached her with a mischievous glint in his eye. "Emma, can I borrow you for a moment?" he asked, his voice laced with excitement. "Of course, Jack," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron and stepping out from behind the counter. He led her to a quieter corner of the bakery, away from the hustle and bustle. The air felt different here, more intimate. Jack reached into his bag and pulled out a beautifully wrapped package. "I have something for you," he said, his eyes twinkling with anticipation. Emma's curiosity was piqued as she carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a leather-bound album, and as she flipped it open, her breath caught in her throat. The pages were filled with photographs, each one capturing a moment from her journey. There were pictures of the empty bakery space before the renovations, snapshots of her working tirelessly, and images of the grand opening. There were candid shots of her laughing with Mrs. Thompson and heartwarming photos of the community coming together. "Jack, this is incredible," Emma said, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you so much." Jack smiled, his expression softening. "I wanted to give you something to remember this journey by. You've come so far, Emma. You should be proud of yourself." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as she hugged Jack tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you and Mrs. Thompson," she whispered. As they pulled away, Jack looked into her eyes, his expression serious. "Emma, there's something I've been wanting to tell you. I know we've both been through a lot, and there are still things we need to work through, but I care about you. A lot." Emma's heart swelled with emotion. She had been so focused on the bakery and the community project that she hadn't allowed herself to fully process her feelings for Jack. But in this moment, everything became clear. "I care about you too, Jack," she said softly. "More than I realized." They stood there for a moment, the world around them fading away. It was just the two of them, connected by shared experiences and a deep understanding. As the event continued, Emma felt a renewed sense of confidence and completeness. She had found her passion, built a successful business, and formed meaningful relationships. But there was still a lingering fear, a nagging doubt that something could disrupt her newfound happiness. Later that evening, as the festivities began to wind down, Emma found herself alone in the bakery, reflecting on the day's events. The album Jack had given her lay open on the counter, and she traced her fingers over the images, reliving each moment. Mrs. Thompson shuffled over to her, her eyes twinkling with wisdom. "You've done something truly special here, Emma. This community is better because of you." "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson," Emma said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without your help and support." The elderly woman reached out and patted Emma's hand. "You're stronger than you know, dear. No matter what the future holds, remember that." Emma nodded, feeling a surge of determination. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew she had the strength to face them. As the last of the guests left and the bakery grew quiet, Emma locked the door and turned off the lights. She stood in the dimly lit space, taking a moment to breathe in the scent of freshly baked bread and pastries. This bakery was more than just a business. It was a symbol of her resilience and her ability to rise above adversity. Jack appeared in the doorway, his silhouette outlined by the streetlights outside. "Ready to call it a night?" he asked, his voice gentle. Emma smiled and walked over to him. "Yeah, I think so." They stepped outside into the cool evening air, the sounds of the city humming around them. As they walked down the street together, Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. She knew there were still uncertainties and challenges ahead, but with Jack by her side and the support of her community, she felt ready to face whatever came her way. "Jack," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Thank you for today, and for everything." He looked at her, his gaze steady and reassuring. "You don't have to thank me, Emma. We're in this together." As they continued to walk, Emma felt a sense of hope and possibility. The future was unwritten, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer the same person who had discovered that devastating letter in her pocket. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever came next. The night sky stretched out above them, filled with stars, and Emma couldn't help but feel that her journey was just beginning. Emma had always found solace in her routine at the bakery, where the scent of freshly baked bread and pastries mingled with the hum of the city outside. But today, the comforting aroma seemed to do little to alleviate the heavy weight that sat in her chest. Mrs. Thompson, her dear friend and mentor, had just revealed a devastating truth. "Emma, dear," Mrs. Thompson had said softly, her voice trembling slightly, "I have something important to tell you." Emma had looked up from the dough she was kneading, sensing the gravity in Mrs. Thompson's tone. "What is it, Mrs. Thompson?" Taking a deep breath, Mrs. Thompson reached out and grasped Emma's flour-dusted hand. "I have been diagnosed with a terminal illness. The doctors have given me only a few months left." The words hung in the air like an unbearable weight, pressing down on Emma's heart. Tears welled up in her eyes as she tried to process the information. "No, Mrs. Thompson, there must be something they can do. There has to be." Mrs. Thompson shook her head gently, her eyes filled with a serene acceptance. "I've lived a long and fulfilling life, Emma, and I'm grateful for every moment of it. But now, I need you to promise me something." Emma nodded through her tears, her throat tight with emotion. "Anything, Mrs. Thompson, anything at all." "You've become like a daughter to me," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice breaking slightly. "Promise me you'll keep the bakery running, keep the recipes we've shared alive, and most importantly, promise me you'll live your life to the fullest, no matter what." Emma could only nod, her heart breaking at the thought of losing Mrs. Thompson. "I promise," she whispered, her voice barely audible. As the days passed, Emma found herself spending more and more time with Mrs. Thompson. They would sit for hours in the cozy living room of Mrs. Thompson's apartment, reminiscing about the past and sharing stories. Mrs. Thompson's wisdom and warmth provided a sense of comfort that Emma desperately needed during this difficult time. One evening, as the sun set over the Chicago skyline, Emma sat with Mrs. Thompson on the small balcony of her apartment. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, casting a warm glow over the city. "Emma," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice tinged with both sadness and contentment, "I've had a good life, and I've been blessed to have met you. You're like the daughter I never had." Emma's eyes filled with tears once again as she reached out to hold Mrs. Thompson's hand. "And you've been like a mother to me, Mrs. Thompson. I can't imagine my life without you." Mrs. Thompson smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Promise me you'll keep going, no matter what happens. You have a wonderful future ahead of you, and I want you to embrace it." "I promise," Emma repeated, her voice trembling with emotion. With the help of Jack, Emma decided to organize a special farewell dinner for Mrs. Thompson, a way to honor her and bring the community together one last time. The preparations for the dinner brought a sense of purpose to Emma, and she threw herself into the task with determination. The night of the dinner arrived, and the bakery was transformed into a magical setting, adorned with twinkling lights and flowers. The aroma of delicious food filled the air, and the sounds of laughter and conversation echoed throughout the space. Mrs. Thompson sat at the head of the table, surrounded by friends and neighbors who had come to celebrate her life. Jack, ever the attentive friend, captured the moments with his camera, documenting the evening's festivities. He approached Mrs. Thompson with a warm smile. "Mrs. Thompson, you look radiant tonight." Mrs. Thompson chuckled softly. "Thank you, Jack. It's a beautiful evening, thanks to Emma and everyone here." Emma watched from a distance, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She approached Mrs. Thompson and knelt beside her chair. "Mrs. Thompson, I just want you to know how much you mean to me. Your guidance and friendship have been a blessing." Mrs. Thompson reached out and gently cupped Emma's face. "And you, my dear, have brought so much joy into my life. I'm so proud of the woman you've become." The evening continued with heartfelt toasts and shared memories. As the night drew to a close, Mrs. Thompson stood up, supported by Emma and Jack. She looked around at the faces of those she had come to cherish. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This has been the most wonderful farewell I could have ever asked for." The room erupted in applause, and Mrs. Thompson's eyes sparkled with gratitude. Emma hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Mrs. Thompson." "I love you too, Emma," Mrs. Thompson replied, her voice filled with warmth and tenderness. In the days that followed, Mrs. Thompson's health continued to decline. Emma remained by her side, providing comfort and companionship during her final days. The bond between them grew even stronger as they shared their hopes, fears, and dreams. One quiet afternoon, as the autumn leaves rustled outside the window, Mrs. Thompson took Emma's hand and whispered, "Remember your promise, Emma. Live your life to the fullest." Tears streamed down Emma's cheeks as she nodded. "I will, Mrs. Thompson. I promise." Mrs. Thompson's eyes closed, and a peaceful smile spread across her face. She took her last breath, leaving Emma to grapple with the profound loss of her dear friend. In the days that followed, Emma found solace in the bakery, pouring her heart and soul into her work. She was determined to honor Mrs. Thompson's memory by keeping her legacy alive. The recipes they had perfected together became the heart and soul of the bakery, drawing in customers who marveled at the delicious creations. Jack continued to be a pillar of support for Emma, standing by her side as she navigated the waves of grief and loss. One evening, as they sat together in the bakery, Jack reached out and took Emma's hand. "Emma, I know it's been tough," Jack said softly, "but remember, you're not alone. I'm here for you, and so is this community." Emma looked into Jack's eyes and felt a sense of warmth and comfort. "Thank you, Jack. I don't know what I would do without you." Jack squeezed her hand gently. "We'll get through this together, Emma, and Mrs. Thompson's legacy will live on thanks to you." As time passed, Emma found herself reflecting on the incredible journey she had been on since discovering that fateful letter in her pocket. Despite the heartache and challenges, she had built something beautiful, a thriving bakery and a community of friends who had become like family. One day, as she stood in the bakery, watching customers come and go, Emma felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that Mrs. Thompson's spirit was with her, guiding her every step of the way. And she was determined to keep her promise to live life to the fullest, cherishing every moment and every connection. With a heart full of gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose, Emma continued to create delicious pastries and build meaningful relationships. She realized that, even in the face of loss, there was beauty to be found in the love and support of those around her. And so, the bakery became not just a place of business, but a testament to the enduring power of friendship, resilience, and the promise of a brighter future. As Emma prepared for a new phase in her life, the sense of peace she had fought so hard to achieve began to feel fragile once again. She had finally found a rhythm in her daily routine, balancing the demands of her growing padaria with moments of quiet reflection, often thinking of Mrs. Thompson and her invaluable lessons. However, that newfound stability was about to be shattered. One rainy afternoon, as Emma was closing up the shop, she turned to find Mark standing in the doorway, his face shadowed by the dim light. The shock of seeing him again sent a shiver down her spine. He looked different, hardened, his eyes glinting with a cold determination she had never seen before. "Emma," he said, his voice low and menacing, "we need to talk." Emma's heart raced. "What do you want, Mark? I thought I made it clear that I don't want anything to do with you." Mark stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a foreboding thud. "I never stopped following you, Emma. You think you can just walk away from me? From us? I don't think so. I've been watching you, and I have plans. Plans that don't include you being happy and successful." Emma's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "You'll see soon enough," he responded with a chilling smile before turning and leaving the padaria. In the days that followed, a series of unsettling events began to plague Emma's beloved bakery. It started with minor inconveniences, sugar replaced with salt, flour bags mysteriously torn open, and then escalated to more severe sabotages. One morning, she arrived to find the padaria's front window shattered, glass strewn across the floor among the delicate pastries she had so carefully prepared the night before. As she bent down to clean up the mess, she found a note, crudely scrawled, "This is just the beginning. Leave Chicago, or suffer the consequences." Emma felt a wave of despair wash over her. She knew she couldn't simply abandon everything she had worked so hard to build, but the fear of what Mark might do next gnawed at her. She confided in Jack, whose concern was palpable. "This has to stop, Emma," Jack said, his voice firm. "We need to go to the police. Mark can't get away with this." Emma nodded, though her mind was racing with worry. "You're right. But what if the police can't do anything? What if he keeps coming after us?" Jack took her hands in his eyes filled with determination. "We'll figure it out together. I'm not going to let him ruin what you've built." Despite reporting the incidents to the authorities, the harassment continued. The pad area became a place of tension and fear, with Emma constantly on edge, wondering what would happen next. Each night, she barely slept, her mind replaying Mark's veiled threats and the sense of dread they carried. Then, one fateful evening, as Emma and Jack were closing up, the situation reached a boiling point. Mark burst into the bakery, fury etched across his face. He was holding a crowbar, and the sight of it made Emma's heart stop. "Mark, please, don't do this," Emma pleaded, standing protectively in front of Jack. "Get out of my way, Emma," Mark snarled. "You think you can just take everything from me and get away with it?" Jack stepped forward, placing himself between Emma and Mark. "Leave her alone, Mark. This isn't going to end well for you." In a blur of motion, Mark swung the crowbar, and Jack tried to block the blow. The impact sent Jack crashing to the floor, blood seeping from a wound on his head. Emma screamed, rushing to his side as Mark stood over them, breathing heavily. "You should have listened, Emma," Mark said, his voice dripping with malice. In that moment of sheer terror and despair, Emma's mind flashed to Mrs. Thompson and the legacy she had left behind. With renewed resolve, she looked up at Mark. "This ends now, Mark. You're not going to destroy my life." Summoning every ounce of courage, Emma lunged for her phone and dialed 911. As the police arrived and apprehended Mark, Emma stayed by Jack's side, her hands trembling but her spirit unbroken. In the aftermath, with Jack in the hospital and the pad area in disarray, Emma discovered a letter Mrs. Thompson had left for her, hidden among her recipe books. It contained a recipe for a secret pastry, one that Mrs. Thompson had guarded closely and promised would bring unparalleled success to whoever mastered it. Reading the letter, Emma felt a surge of hope. She dedicated herself to perfecting the recipe, pouring her heart and soul into the process. The community rallied around her, eager to support the Padaria and honor Mrs. Thompson's memory. When Jack finally woke up, his eyes met Emma's, filled with relief and a hint of a smile. "You did it," he whispered weakly. Emma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We did it, Jack. Together." As the weeks turned into months, the Padaria flourished, its reputation bolstered by the new, secret pastry that became the talk of Chicago. Emma found herself reflecting on the tumultuous journey she had endured, the betrayal, the loss, the fear, and ultimately, the strength she had discovered within herself. Standing in the bustling Padaria, watching customers savor the fruits of her labor, Emma realized that true happiness wasn't about the absence of challenges. It was about facing those challenges head-on, drawing strength from within, and finding joy in the simplest of moments. And though she knew life would always be unpredictable, filled with its own share of heartbreak and triumph, Emma felt ready to embrace whatever came next. After all, she had learned that the most important ingredient in any recipe for success was resilience, and that was something no one could ever take away from her.